to our revived show of Political Bull. I have two candidates running for the State House today, and we are interviewing Dave McWilliams, who's running for Franklin 3-2, and we have Nick Brosseau, who is running for Franklin 4. I will ask them first to introduce themselves and give you a little history of where they've been and where they're going and why they're running. So, Dave, would you like to start it off?
Well, first of all, I've been a lifelong resident of the St. Albans area. I worked for the city of St. Albans for 39 years. Was their animal control officer, also union steward for the labor union AFL-CIO. I've been involved in town government. I was on the select board in two different times, in 1990 and 91. And then in 2015, I was on for 2 years. I keep on running for offices because I think the issues ought to be brought up, what's affecting the taxpayers of the state of Vermont and Franklin County, because, people are moving out of Franklin County by the carloads. I was talking at Morris Service Center, and he was telling me there was 4 people that came into his station and said they're either moving to North Carolina or moving to Tennessee. So if we don't get our taxes under control and properly fund education and all the issues that are affecting Vermonters, then there's going to be a heavier leave of a lot of people who can't afford to stay in Vermont anymore.
Next, I'd like Nick to introduce himself.
Sure. My name is Nick Brosseau. I'm a candidate for state representative for Franklin 4, Swanton Sheldon. I'm a lifelong Swanton resident. I graduated from MVU in 2009. I graduated from Johnson State College in 2015. I recently completed an AmeriCorps term at Resource, which is a local nonprofit in Williston, working with basically being a volunteer coordinator, working with Reach Up, and getting volunteers into our store. And I also worked with trainees in the store, helping them out. So that's my experience. Why did I choose to run? Well, there was a need. Franklin 4 had no Democratic candidate on the ballot. And so I thought that was not a good thing for the community. So I stepped up. I ran a write-in campaign, got enough votes to get the nomination, and now I'm running a campaign. So this is a new experience for me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, congratulations and good luck. Having had the experience myself in 2 elections, not being successful, I hope you have more luck than I had. Nick, would you tell people what your views are on the carbon tax first? We'll start with that.
The carbon tax, well, I personally think global warming is something we need to do to fight. But I don't think the carbon tax is the best way to go about it. I think too many people rely on their car to get to work. Public transport exists. I took in public transport a lot, but it's not where it needs to be. And I can say that as someone who's taken public transport. If you can't rely on it, and most people don't. So we need to change in culture in regards to that. I would support more funding for public transport. I also think that we should be putting more into promoting electric car usage, to maybe getting tax incentives for using an electric car. I just don't think I don't think our carbon tax is the best use of our. It's the best. I don't think it's a good thing for our community at this point.
I agree. I think carbon tax would tax the poor people, because they can't afford to go to the newer technology.
Yeah.
And so it would be a heavy burden tax on them. Dave, your views, please.
Well, the carbon tax, the Courier just sent a question in reference to the carbon tax. Do you support an 88-cent increase in, the carbon tax? I do not support anything pertaining to the carbon tax. 88 cents would totally destroy the middle income, the poor, and the senior citizens here, because they can't afford to take and also, pay that amount on their fuel, not only for their vehicles, but on their fuel for their houses and stuff like that. By doing that, it would hurt a lot of low income and people that can't afford, that are having a hard time right now. A lot of our senior citizens are selling their houses because they can't afford their property taxes anymore, so they're moving into, the senior housing. If we, I think overall Vermont does a very good job as far as keeping our environment clean, so we're not polluting the air as much as all these other states that have coal and stuff, coal-fired plants and stuff like that. I think, anybody that supports that 88 cents carbon tax, they ought to put them on a rocket and send them to the moon, because that's crazy.
I'd like to expand on what Nick was talking about. If we could increase the funding for public transportation, what changes would you make?
More direct routes to Burlington and Chittenden County would be the biggest change. That's where most of the work is. I feel like if you're in a place like Fairfield and you don't have a car, you can't really do that much. And it costs a lot to do much. Taxis are expensive. And I know this as this is kind of a little pet issue of mine, because I didn't have transportation for a long time. It was very hard for me to work every day because of that. But eventually I did, and with the car it's become a lot easier. But I do sympathize with people that have transportation issues, and I think it should be expanded, and I think it'd be good for the environment if we expand public transport in this area.
Now, rural areas really have a problem with transportation. Dave, you have anything?
Well, as far as transportation, I think GMTA is doing a good job, but for people that are working in St. Albans or Burlington, there's not a direct time en route to to like IBM or Global Industries or to major places where they can get to their work in Burlington or St. Albans. Right now, GMTA goes up to Newport, up to Richford, and they pick people up there. They bring them down to the industrial park in St. Albans Town. There's a time when they get them there, and there's a time when they leave. So it basically helps people that are working in those factories in the St. Albans Town Industrial Park. We need to do more with transportation. At one time, there was talk about having a train go from St. Albans to Essex, which would help a lot of people going to and from work and stuff like that. Electric cars are good, but who in Franklin County can afford one of those? They're putting in a lot more stations, which is good. So that way, if you're traveling 300 miles, you got to stop and recharge it. At least there's going to be more charging stations around. These Prius vehicles, there's a lot of those around. My friend has them. I've rode in one of them, but I felt like I was in a matchbox because it was so small. So, we need to do more with transportation to help the senior citizens and also to help the working people in Franklin County.
Let's go to discuss minimum wage. Dave, you had an idea.
Well, minimum wage, it's all right for, this actually should be a two-tier. Minimum wage is for kids that are still in high school that want to earn some money to buy gas for their mom, father's car if they're going somewhere. That being the minimum wage, they can pay up to $9.60 an hour. And of course, if you're a waitress, then it's different figures. But when you graduate from high school, and it's hard to live on $9.60 an hour. So I support a livable wage of $15 an hour, not in 2024, but now, because of the fact that people are having a hard time, making ends meet. There's a large department store here in St. Albans area that takes and hires a lot of employees, but they pay them just above minimum wage just to keep them. So, but they're not making enough, so that they're also on our social services to help them, to survive. So I think some companies will take advantage of them because they keep them just above a little bit of minimum wage, but that doesn't give them enough to pay for their rent, their heat, their lights, and the necessities of life. So I think we need to get the wages up to $15 an hour for people who have graduated from high school. Students in school should be paid the minimum wage.
Thank you. Nick?
Yes, I support a $15 minimum wage. I support, Republicans talk about there being a affordability crisis in the state. Well, one reason why there's an affordability crisis in the state is because people don't have the income to pay for the items they need, like electricity and rent and childcare. I believe that we should be, I believe I might have a little difference in opinion with David. I do support maybe doing it by year, raising it by year, maybe to like 2021 or 2024. I think that would give people time to get more used to it. But I think that the minimum wage should be a livable wage and I also think it should be after it gets to $15, we should tie it to inflation, so we won't have to keep addressing that issue again.
There's so many indices of inflation, though. If you listen to Bernie Sanders, he talks about one index for inflation that's used to raise Social Security has nothing to do with the expenses that a senior incumbent in his index of living wage or we don't buy computers, we don't get into games, we don't buy brand new sports cars or anything like this. The seniors are more interested in medicine, healthcare, heating, and lights and things like this, some of the basic necessities to survive. And when those go up, they really hit the seniors hard on a fixed income. What index I was just going to ask, what index do you think is good for the minimum wage, to gauge the minimum wage?
That's an interesting question. I'm not an expert on that issue, but I say whatever we can tie it to, whatever our money, whatever
the standard minimum wage that the government uses.
Yeah, whatever.
Or is using now.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. My problem with minimum wage is that if you don't, the $15 an hour was a livable wage, 4 years ago when they started talking about the $15. We have since grown since that, and I don't think people could live on $15 an hour today. If we wait until 2022 or 2020 or 21 or whatever out in the future, it's going to be even less effective in bringing people up to a standard. I would like to go to gun control. I think that's a hot issue, especially in Franklin County. How do you feel about the new gun control law, Nick?
I support the new gun legislation. It might be an unpopular issue, but I believe that most of it is reasonable. I don't think bump stocks are needed. Are we trying to fight a militia? Why do we need bump stocks? We're not going to kill a deer with an automatic gun. I believe that closing the gun show loophole is a good idea and is reasonable. I think raising the age for purchase, as long as they take a safety course, is a good idea. And I think that reducing the magazine size is also reasonable. I think that legislation, our gun laws need to be updated, and I think what the legislature recently passed is a good idea.
Dave, do you agree?
Well, in reference to the gun law, they asked me last night at the forum there at City Hall that, there's no way that Vermont citizens are going to let anybody take away their guns. To either cut down on, you can go out and buy an M16 or you can go out and buy a AK-47. People buy those guns, and, to me, if you're a responsible person and you know how to handle a gun and you've taken 100 safety classes, then basically you should have a right to have any gun you want. But having that butt stock or whatever you want to call that thing, imagine shooting at a deer with one of those. You don't have to take it and have it butchered because it'll all be butchered anyway.
Be hamburgered.
A lot of the gun rights people are totally against it, and because they feel that it's an invasion of their rights to have guns or whatever accessories that they have. But, to use that butt stock, I think it's, we're not fighting with the Russians or anybody else, so I don't think they're needed. I do feel, I was talking to a person, I won't discuss her name because she works in a gun shop. They're selling more magazines right now than they ever did before because our government said that they're going to take and downsize the length of how many bullets you can put in a magazine. So the government just made business a lot better for a lot of these gun shops. So, but, proper handling of a gun, education, and making sure that people that have mental health issues don't have guns because, sometimes people just flip. You know, I had a son that passed away because his wife was running on him and he shot himself. I couldn't do anything about it. Couldn't stop it.
No, you can't. If they don't use a gun, they'll find some other way.
That's right.
Yeah.
And more money needs to be put into mental health too, I think. You always hear people to say, oh, when one of these tragedies happen, oh, we need to put more money into mental health, and then nobody does anything about it. So that's really something that needs to definitely be looked at.
I agree. Very strongly agree. Mental health is a big problem in the state.
Yeah.
We closed a mental health hospital and put a lot of people on the street years ago, and
Waterbury State Hospital.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and we had to replace it. I think there was federal law, wasn't it, that they could only put in 8 beds or something like this?
Yeah,
They were limited in the number of beds if they wanted federal financing.
That incident they had in the city of St. Albans where it was all drug related up on Diamond Street, where, you know, these people were on heavy drugs, and the police department was able to get the girl off the second story window. And the guy, you know, was a known dealer, you know, and here he was going around, you know, and, selling drugs. And at the same time, you know, the police officer that was standing in front of that door, it's a miracle that he didn't get hit with a bullet. He did get hit with some glass, but mental health people or people that are really out on drugs and opiates and all that stuff, you know, we got to stop it. You know, we got to. Our judicial system stinks. You know, we put them in there, or we bring them into the courthouse and we tap them on the hand, and out the door they go. Our jail system sometimes people are in there for minor offenses. It should be hardcore, you know. And if you do something or shooting at somebody or something like that, then you should get the maximum sentence.
Do you agree, Nick?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for prison reform. We have more people in this country in jail per capita than places like China and Iran do. I think that's not reasonable. I think that too many people are getting put away for minor offenses that could be just dealt with through alternative means, like the criminal
Probation.
Probation or court diversion and community service. That we don't need to be locking as many people up as we are, and we definitely don't need to be transporting them out of state for committing offenses. That transporting to Mississippi, there's really no reason for that. They should be housed in state, and I think that our community would be better off for it.
Okay, education is my field. How do you propose we improve education in the state? And do you think it needs improvement? Some tests show us pretty high. Some tests show that the Vermont schools are functioning very well. It depends on what survey you listen to and where you talk. Nick, you want to?
I think we need to be doing more to expand children's access to pre-K. It's definitely been shown through studies that the earlier they start school, the better, or the earlier students start school, the better they do throughout it. I would support creating like a tuition assistance program to help people that cannot afford to get pre-K, help them get the finances they need, and also be good for childcare because it give a place for people to bring their child during the day when they might be working. So I would support creating a program for that, and we also need to take a look at higher education costs in the state, but that might be a little bit of a different issue.
Dave?
Well, certain school districts in Franklin County are in this district because the state of Vermont forced them. But there's other school districts like, is it Swanton, Highgate, Franklin, that are not in it, but they're
You're talking Act 46.
Yeah, for Act 46, that that are not in it, and they don't want to be in it, and that's the choice of the voters. The voters voted not to go to Act 46 to go into the district, and they feel comfortable with the quality of education that their kids are getting in that area. Act 46 was good for when it first went into effect. We're going to get a 10 cents, 8 cents, 6 cents, 4 cents down. And the concept of education by going into that district, yeah, I saw a little bit of difference. But now what's happening is, take for instance, St. Albans City, St. Albans Town, and Fairfield. If a school's got a lot of indebtedness now, what happens is all three those school districts, taxpayers, are going to make up that indebtedness, whatever school that is in debt. And I don't think that is good, because it's going to raise their taxes again in the long run.
Well, the incentives are drying up.
That's right.
They started out at 8 cents, and then they're, I think, next year, 0, aren't they?
Yeah, I think so, next year.
I think it's next year that there's 0 aid for the taxes. That's too bad that they had to put such a big carrot out there to get people to act. And I think a lot of people acted on that and not on the sense of what effect it would have on the children. Nick, what do you think about Act 46?
I believe there should be, I do support school consolidation in theory. I think that it makes sense for especially places where the high school's consolidated already, to like maybe Swanton, Franklin, and Highgate, for example, to merge them together. I don't think it should be forced on the community. I believe there should be choice, but I believe places should be encouraged to consolidate. I think in the long run, our state would be better, especially with our children's population. There being less students going to these schools. I think consolidating is a good thing.
What about Franklin and Sheldon that had almost unanimous votes not to consolidate?
Yeah, I think that it should be the choice of the community.
Okay, how about the lake? That's a big issue here in Franklin County. Not just Lake Champlain, but Lake Carmi up in Franklin and other ponds. Fairfield Pond, I think, is starting to show wear and tear. What should be done to protect the waters of the lake?
Well,
Dave?
first of all, I think Lake Carmi would be a good test area because the Lake Champlain is so big. But we also have to look at why is the lake turning that way? Why is the E. coli so high? Why is there blue-green algae up there? We have to look at where the sources are coming from that is feeding into Lake Carmi, which is some of the farmers run off on their fields. It's some of the camps that are not up to standard. They don't have, every camp or house around any area up there of Lake Carmi should be dye tested and made sure that they're not polluting into any stream or into any Lake Carmi at all. We also have to remember that the residents around there, you can't use these pesticides that they're putting on their grass and killing weeds and stuff like that, because that sooner or later is going to get into the water system. So we also have to make sure that the boaters, some boats do have portlets on their boats and stuff like that. We got to make sure that if you ever dump that into any lake or in Lake Carmi, that the fine would be $1,000 just to start off, because everybody has to work together. We have to make sure we're using the proper chemicals in our toilets, also in our washing our dishes, so that way we don't pollute any future of Lake Carmi or any lake, in order to clean up those lakes and ponds, stuff like that.
They do have low phosphate and no phosphate detergents available.
Yep, that's right.
But I don't know if they clean as effectively as the ones that do have phosphate.
Yep.
Maybe we have to give up a little cleanliness to clean up the lake.
Well, just like Lake Champlain, you brought that up. Well, the Lake Champlain, until we take and make sure that we have watchdogs over wastewater treatment plants and watchdogs over housing and camps around the lake, both on the New York side and Vermont side, to make sure that their septic systems are working right, to make sure the wastewater treatment plants, City of Burlington, how many times have they polluted in the last year? At least 4 or 5 times, and it's partially treated, it's not fully treated, and that's killing our lakes.
They close the beaches.
That's right, they close the beach. Once you get above a certain E. coli at the Bay Beach in the month of August, just about the whole beach was closed for the month of August. because of E. coli. But there's two types of E. coli. There's human E. coli, but there's also bird E. coli. And this year we had seagulls, we had Canadian geese, and we couldn't actually get a good count, what the E. coli was, because they don't break it down whether it's birds or human. Because the lake is so low, and the birds are down there. There are thousands of them, between seagulls and Canadian geese. We got to do something to get them out of there, to scare them. I used to go down there with my 410, and because the Canadian geese were on the beach, but also going up on the lawns, and they were pooping everywhere. So I got permission from the Federal Fish and Wildlife, the State Fish and Wildlife, to go down there and scare them, not to shoot them, to scare them. The town of St. Albans has tried lights. We've also tried fox decoys, and we've done everything. And the federal government will come in and capture all the Canadian geese, and they'll destroy them. But then the town of St. Albans is going to have to pay $1,500 to $3,000 in order to have that done. So that is a fish and wildlife problem. But we also have to realize that if we don't get the geese and the seagulls off the beach, that's why the E. coli is part of the problem with birds, but also wastewater treatment plants. When the city plant goes into overflow, it's partially treated, and mostly the solids stay in the plant. The city is doing an $18 million upgrade on their plant, and it's badly needed, and I appreciate as a town resident that we can clean that up. Behind Black Bridge, there's so much sediment down there that one time in the wintertime, and we went out there with an ice auger, and we drilled down through the ice, and when you brought it up, it felt like an outhouse, because that's what it stunk like. So there's so much sediment behind Black Bridge. I don't know what we can do, whether to dredge it or put a dam up and put the line right straight down through to McQuam Shore out into the middle of the lake. But, we got to start cleaning up our lake before it dies.
For sure. Nick, how do you feel about that?
I think Mr. McWilliams started it brilliantly. We need a multifaceted approach to make sure the lakes are keeping clean. Everything from farmers to runoff from the city of Burlington's polluting the lake. So everybody needs to take their people need to take responsibility for what they're doing to it, and we need we need penalties, and we actually need the funding there the legislator needs to get the funding there to make sure the lake cleanup actually happens.
Okay, good. Let's go to Act 250. What is Act 250?
Act 250 is actually controlling of what you can do with your property. By Act 250 is also called a little bit of regional planning that determines what you can do on your property and what you can't do. At first, Act 250 was a way of controlling development in areas where they wanted to do it. Regional planning right now for this area determines any future growth in any one of these cities or towns, where you want to put it. They also make mandates, to take and, make you spend more money in order to develop your property. I was working on a project, and it was a 3,200 square foot building, and the price for all the permits to get that building up and going was $21,000. There should be a permitting process, but there shouldn't be outrageous prices, that's causing extra cost to the developer. Ben & Jerry's just went through Act 250 and got all their permits. Their permitting cost was over $400,000. You imagine what they could have done to put more people to work with all that money spent on permits. Peerless just put an addition. They spent $200,000 or $300,000. But there should be a permitting process, but it shouldn't be overburdened where the cost is so outrageous.
Act 250 is original intent, like you say, I agree, was to help control development and be environmentally friendly. But it's become a revenue source with the fees that these corporations have to put out. And of course, that has a reflection on attracting new business to the state too.
That's right.
Nick, what do you think about Act 250?
I think on the broader picture, Act 250 is a good thing. I'm not an expert of the details of it, In terms of like the permits and how much it costs. I would have to look into it myself. I think, of course, Act 250 is pretty legendary at this point when it comes to how it controls development in the state of Vermont, making sure our forests our forests look as beautiful as they are in our land. But I would have to look into that issue more.
I would like to know how you folks, you are both running against incumbents. Representative Lynn Dickinson is already a member of the legislature. How would your votes differ from hers?
How would I differ from Linda Dickinson? Because she's a Republican, I'm actually a Democrat, but I didn't make the date line, so I'm running as an independent. She doesn't support a livable wage. She doesn't support the Family Medical Leave Act. She does support little issues, as far as, some of the nurses and stuff like that, because her husband and they belong to, the business group and stuff like that. I look at, until we can take and get people that work for the people in Franklin County as far as for livable wages and benefits. And, one of the things that, I feel that I would be different is that I'm not a 10-year person. I'll probably go for one term and probably, see what I can do. And if I can't do anything in 1 year, my 2-year term, then I probably won't go back. A lot of people say it's very frustrating down there that the Republicans are against the Democrats, and we need to work together for the people of Franklin County and the state of Vermont. And if we don't take and try to do something to make Vermont better and so try to get the taxes under control, then we're also going to run into problem of more people leaving.
You're setting a huge goal, though, for you to learn to become an effective legislature in only 2 years. I don't disagree with you. I've been involved in politics for a long time. I've burnt some bridges with some of my select board people because I'm a person, I come right up front and I say what I believe in and what I would support. Just like the town of St. Albans gave $10,000 to Swan for the wind project, for their attorney fees. I said, the only way I would support it is if the voters of the town of St. Albans voted to give them whatever, 10,000, 20,000, whatever they wanted. But for me, sitting on that board and spending $10,000 of town taxpayers' money without their permission, to me, was wrong. And that's why everybody on the select board voted against me during my re-election. That's hard to believe, Dave.
Yeah.
Nick, you are running against two established senators.
Representatives.
In your district. You have Marianne Gamache and Senator Randy Brock. How would you differ from there?
Representative Brian Savage.
Brian Savage, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Randy Brock's running.
Randy is senator.
Yeah.
Thank you. Against Brian Savage, and I don't know where I got Randy from, and Marianne Gamache. How would your votes differ from theirs?
Oh, well, they would definitely differ. I think Marianne Gamache and Brian Savage are pretty standard conservative Republicans. I would think even Marianne Gamache is more on the more radical side. I would support things like paid family leave, which they voted against. I would support a $15 minimum wage, which they voted against. I would support more government involvement in healthcare and creating a universal primary care system, which they wouldn't support. They're even more. Mayor Gamache especially is more regressive on issues like gay marriage and a woman's right to choose that I think in Vermont are pretty long settled issues that I don't think if people in Swanton Sheldon knew more about and they're in her position on would not support. So I would differ in a lot of ways.
You brought up something that it's got by me, healthcare. I'd like both of your opinions on healthcare in the state. What would you support for healthcare in the state, for healthcare insurance?
I think we need to take incremental steps to create a universal healthcare system in this state. I know since that creating universal healthcare immediately is not feasible, So I would take incremental steps to create a universal primary care system, which has been proven, if more people see their primary care doctor earlier, has proven to save money on emergency room visits. If we prevent diseases earlier in patients, that would save money. I would support the bill that was tossed around in the legislature called S53, which was taking a look at how we could pay for it, and the steps we would need to take as a state to enact it. So I don't think that did not pass the legislature this session, but I would support some a legislation like that in the future.
So when you talk about universal primary care, you're talking about the state having a program that would pay for primary care visits.
Yes.
For both wellness visits and checkups and preventative.
Yeah.
Are actually addressing a health condition.
Yep.
Dave?
Well, I retired in 2013 and I went on the Vermont Health Connect. At first, it was okay. I had high deductibles and high co-pays, and I was paying about $300 a month. Then after the first year, my premium went up to $500 a month. And the problem that I had with the Vermont Health Connect is I'm the one paying for it. My wife was on Medicare. They took my wife's income and put it together as a household income, and my premium went from $300 to about $600 a month. I think we need a single-payer health insurance around here. Right now, when I go to my doctor's office, how many times do you actually see a doctor? I see a physician assistant, because a lot of the doctors are leaving Vermont because they know they can make more money in California and New York City and all those other places. I have no problem with physician assistants. Sometimes they're better even than the doctors, but the cost of health insurance is out of control. Some of the medicine that I take for my diabetes, is $150 a month. Between the glipizide and the metformin that I take. We need to do everything possible to take and get this health insurance under control, because it's out of control. The opiate problem that we got here in Franklin County and throughout the United States is because a lot of people, they have operations, they get oxycodone and all that. And a lot of these pharmaceuticals, DJ Donovan is going after those companies because of the fact that they were prescribing to these doctors, you do this, and you might get a trip on a Caribbean cruise, or you might get a 55-inch flat screen TV, and that was wrong, because these doctors would promote these pills or promote Celebrex or oxycodone and all these painkillers, and now we're running into a problem where we got an opiate problem here in Franklin County, and we got a place on North Main Street. You go down there between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning at that Barb office down there, which used to be the KC's, and the parking lot's full. We got nobody to blame other than ourselves, and we need to control the prescriptions. If you need painkiller, 5 days, not 30 days, because people in turn sell those opiates to other people.
Surplus.
Just to get high.
Becomes an income source.
That's right.
Or a way to support their own habits. Nick, what would you consider for health care? We already talked about your primary care, but would you support a Medicare for all on a federal level? Yeah. Not that a state rep has anything to say about the federal level, but is that where you're headed?
Definitely on a federal level. I think that would be the best place for it to happen. That's where most of the funding comes from. Of course, it's the federal government. That's where it needs to happen. I think ultimately, they have the biggest tax base for it, and they already have Medicare and Medicaid, which cover a large portion of the population. And I think Medicare and Medicaid are very popular programs. So that's where it needs to start.
Medicare in particular is an effective program. Medicaid, they underpay their
doctors,
providers, so badly that nobody wants to take a Medicaid patient. All righty. Okay, how do you, let's get back to education. How would you support education in the state?
I would support moving the funding for it from the property tax to an income tax. I think that would put more of the burden on people to fund education, people who can afford it. I think that's where we need to be moving, and that's how we should fund education in the state.
Of course, a lot of people claim, I get a tax bill for $5,000, but they don't tell you that the state's paying, $2,500 of that $5,000 tax bill for them. And that does take the burden off, and that's what Act 60 was meant to do. Dave, how would you fund?
Well, first of all, I don't know who you're talking to get a $2,500 tax rebate from the state. Mine was $450 last year. So that's what I got towards lowering my property taxes. I have a modular home. I have no cellar. I have a shed and 200 feet of driveway, and I pay $3,500 a year. Most of it is through education. 20% is cost of towns' budgets. But what we need to do is fund education the way it should be, through an income base, because of the fact that, property tax owners, people that are retired, people that have lost their either husband or wife, can't afford to keep on doing this increase, especially if they lost one of their mates. Because when that mate, their husband or wife passed away, their Social Security goes away.
Their income dries up.
So, I think that, that is a lot of ways of why people are selling their house, because they can't afford to stay in them. We're putting up more, low-income housing. We're putting up, senior housing up there on Fairfax Street, and now down in Georgia, they're going to be putting up more senior housing. They're going to eliminate that campground down there, and they're going to put in senior housing down there. So, I think what a lot of the governments are doing are forcing people to come into these areas, and and only the filthy rich are going to be able to stay in Vermont because of the high cost of living, whether it's fuel, lights, and stuff like that.
It is expensive.
Yeah.
We have a limited population paying for a huge infrastructure. We have about 2 minutes left, and I would like to give you each a chance to maybe cover anything that we haven't covered, or let the voters know any information that you think that they help them make a decision on who to vote for. Nick, you can start.
Sure, I can start. If you want new blood in the legislature, if you want a fresh face, if you want someone who will promote progressive values, everything from universal health care to paid family leave to everything we talked about today, vote for me, Nick Brosseau, for office. I would definitely appreciate it. I would put a lot of energy to it. Politics is something I've been interested in all my life, and I would be passionate in the legislature fighting for progressive causes.
Very good. You have youth on your side. Dave, what do you get to say?
Well, first of all, a couple of subjects we didn't touch was social welfare system. The social welfare system needs to be revised. People that are on it, some are on it, they're abusing it. I don't mind helping the needy, but not the greedy. Daycare is so costly for a single parent or parents to work, $150 to $200 a week per child. That is it's out of control, and we need to do something to help these daycares so that they don't charge so much, so that people can work. Voting for me is a person that that I've always spoken up throughout my lifetime, and I will always speak up in the future. I'm not the smartest person on the block, but I'll tell you what, I do have the mouth, and I will talk about the issues, and I always use public access to bring the voters up to date on what's going on in Montpelier if I'm elected.
Thank you very much, both of you. And I would like to say in closing, anybody that would like to air their views, Political Bull, when we set up the program, was not meant to be slanted towards one party or one set of views. We're here to air all the ideas, and if any candidate would like some time, please get a hold of either myself or Dave, who was my co-host last election. We'll schedule you in before the election time. But if anybody is interested in coming in and airing their views, in particular the people who these folks are running against, I'd love to give you the time. Thank you all for listening and tuning in, and we hope to see you again.